Chapter 61 Invitation Dreadfort Castle POV of Domeric Bolton. A few years later. Lord Stark has sent us both an invitation, Aunt Barbary said as Domeric chewed on the venison for a moment before he drank some boiled water to wash it down. Invitation for what? He asked as Maester Wolkan bowed and left the room. It had been a few years since he started building the shipbuilding factory, and he was now 11 years old. During this time, no significant events could be said to have taken place. He continued to develop his land. Some of his projects were completed, such as the shipbuilding factory, which was continuously building ships at the moment. He also started some new projects, such as building the grandest library in the whole world. But his most notable event in the past years was probably the renewal of the symbol's magic 5 times. The first time, he got a book called Compendium of Healing Spells and Charms. It improved his ability to survive, and he could use it to help people from his inner circle if necessary. But that's it. He couldn't use it to develop his lands or increase his strength. As a second reward, he got a book called Common Runic Enchantments. As the name suggests, it was a book about enchantments that could be done with runes. These enchantments weren't too special or powerful but common ones, such as hardening, sharpening, warming, cooling, and many more enchantments like these. This reward was more practical, and he could use it on some objects and places, secretly of course. He could also create a personal legion equipped with magical armor and weapons. But first, he had to find a way to engrave runes without magical support. He couldn't sit and engrave runes on countless armor and weapons. That's why he wanted his own men to engrave the runes. That way he could create a production line for magical armor and weapons. But the problem was the ink. The ink he used when he was engraving was poor quality. It was the expected outcome because he didn't have proper magical materials and a magical ink recipe. So, he had to magically support the runes while engraving them. But his people couldn't do that. And thirdly, he got a book called Conqueror of Space. Like the time he got the book called Art of Time, his heart skipped a beat. Alas, it wasn't something super powerful but a book about space enchantments, spells, charms, and items. He could improve his bottomless pouches, construct buildings that were spatially enchanted, and cast a few more spells and charms with that knowledge. For a moment he thought he could make a magical suitcase for himself like Newt Scamander's suitcase that he heard about in his past life. But he was disappointed when he looked at the information about the suitcase. Because the suitcase was not only a spatially magical item but also an alchemical artifact. Therefore, in order to make a magical suitcase for himself, he had to find some magical materials from his past life or materials equivalent to the original materials. But he could still make his grandest library in the world even more grandest with spatial enchantments. He also thought of spatially enchanting the clock towers to convert their inside into museums. That way he could exhibit his invention's old and new versions and some historical items there. This would have increased the number of tourist attractions in his land. Like the level 2 green orbs that he got in the past, the rewards were good but not too great. So, after he got 3 green orbs, he chose to sacrifice the other 2 magic reserves that his tattoo replenished to upgrade the symbol of Deathly Hallows. Because the symbol was level 2 at that time, he needed to make 2 sacrifices to upgrade the symbol to level 3. It has been a while since then, and he was waiting for the symbol to replenish his magic. At that time, he could get his first level 3 reward, a blue one, for Robb Stark's 10th name day. His aunt said with a frown, and he instantly realized that there was something wrong with this invitation. He was not very good at politics, but he was good at reading people. And his aunt's current expression clearly told him that she was suspicious of the invitation letter for some reason. Is there something wrong with that? He asked, and her frown deepened as she read the letter once again. Lord Stark is not someone who throws such extravagant feasts, even if it's the 10th name day of his heir, she said as she put down the paper on the table and thought about it for a moment, and the timing is too convenient. Convenient for what? He asked. You conscripted some 1,000 men in your army a few weeks ago. She explained to him. He must have heard about it by now. But coming here to check on his own would be too risky for him, and calling you to personally meet him could be seen as rude. Calling you like this, on the other hand, would serve the purpose of interrogating you and dealing with the situation properly, as the other lords would be there to support him in any decision he makes against you. This all seems a bit too much to me, he said and picked up the letter on his own before reading its content quickly. I didn't think that Lord Stark was the kind of person to make such cunning decisions. It was probably done by his wife, Lady Catelyn Stark, she said with some venom in her voice. Her hate for Maesters Starks and Tullis was an open secret to everyone. And I doubt that this is something as simple as an interrogation. He raised an eyebrow at that, wondering where this all was leading. You know that Lord Stark's daughter, Sansa, is only a few years younger than you, don't you? She asked, and he instantly understood what all this was about. They're planning to betroth her to me. Chapter 62 Traumas from the Past. First bonus chapter of the week. Dreadfort Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. They plan to betroth Sansa to me. Domeric said with a frown, not liking the idea of someone deciding the future of such a young girl. He also didn't want anyone to decide his life, though. But he also knew that betrothal deals between houses were one of this world's customs, and a lot of houses were doing that. A few years ago, he would have thrown a tantrum and said things like no one could decide his fate or force him to do anything. But he didn't do things like that anymore. In the last few years, he has realized something very important and alarming about himself. He was becoming someone he certainly didn't want to be, like someone he would despise in his past life. Someone like Voldemort, or like someone worse than Voldemort. That was a hard blow to him. So he tried to find the reasons behind his behavior, and eventually came to the conclusion that he had psychological traumas from his past life. When he was living with Dursleys, he couldn't control his life. The Dursleys decided what he should and shouldn't do, and if he did something he shouldn't, he was punished severely. Therefore, he overreacted when someone forced him to do something in this world. And he didn't like it and was irritated quickly when someone called him kid or boy because that reminded him of his Uncle Vernon. When he was in Hogwarts, strange things happened year after year, and he realized that he was being manipulated by Dumbledore, whom he saw as his grandfather. Therefore, he had some trust issues in his second life. Then Ginny betrayed and cheated on him. So, he was oversensitive about betrayals and had some fear of being cheated on again. And because of all these traumas from his past life, he became someone cold, someone throwing tantrums for small things, someone manipulative, someone stealing people's free will, someone he deeply despised. But he had changed and fixed his mentality in the past years after he realized that he had some issues. He certainly didn't accept a forced betrothal in the past. But now he was calm. He knew why Lord Stark decided to betroth Sansa with him, and understood that it was a political decision. Also in this world, some betrothal deals concluded even before kids were born. So, the betrothal between Sansa and him, among the two most powerful houses in the north, wasn't something absurd. It was a good move in terms of political stance. And politics must be dealt with politics. He could definitely change the situation or bend the conditions with politics. Throwing tantrums wouldn't be helpful in this situation. And if he couldn't change the situation with politics, that was also okay with him. He didn't want to betroth with Sansa because she was too young to understand the situation. If he was to be betrothed to a person, he would at least expect the other person to understand the situation and willingly accept the betrothal. But except for that, a betrothal with Boltons and Starks was a beneficial thing for him. Becoming an ally with Warden House of North would prevent a lot of trouble in the future. Not that he needed, but less trouble was better than more trouble, right? As for Sansa's age, he would think something about that. It's a smart decision, she said with a shrug, though there was a bitter smile on her face. Your power and wealth are increasing day by day, and the Starks are feeling threatened. As they should. But they cannot attack you without any provocation. Lord Stark's honor wouldn't allow it. So, marrying you to their daughter and cementing the alliance between the two houses is a rather smart decision. One that I would have made as well if I had been in their shoes. He raised an eyebrow at her, and she simply smiled at him. You should be happy with this. A marriage with a Stark would be a great boon to your house, she said. Maybe, but Sansa is still too young to understand the meaning of this betrothal. And if I am going to betroth someone, I want to at least like her and her to like me, even if there wasn't love between us. So, I need to talk with Lord Stark about some conditions. Winterfell Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. Domeric was at Winterfell at the moment. House Bolton was one of the last ones to arrive at Winterfell and Robb Stark's 10th name day. He came to Winterfell with only 20 men along with Aunt Barbary Dustin. He didn't bring any direwolf with him, as riding a direwolf, which was Stark's symbol, a second time into the Stark house might be taken as an insult by the other lords. After all, at the first time, there weren't any other lords from other houses, only the Lord Stark family and their castle folks were there. Probably Lord Stark understood the reason why Domeric did that in the past, and he didn't pursue the matter. But doing that again while all lords from Nort were at the Winterfell would be an insult to Stark House. He also didn't bring any wargs or giants with him either. Although no one had said anything to him yet, it was a fact that people were uneasy about him, of the power that he's accumulated over the past few years. And they're even nervous of Raxa, who was easily the largest person they had ever seen in the whole north. He wondered how they would have reacted if he had brought the giants and the wargs with him. Good thing I didn't, he thought, but he understood their fear to an extent. The Boltons have a bad history, and reading the minds of the other lords made it very clear that even if some of them smiled at him and tried to act confident, they were slightly nervous about the whole thing. Even Lord Wyman Manderley, who acted like a kind grandfather to him, held a slight resentment because of the amount of business that is being taken away from his lands after he opened the new port at the Weeping Water. Normally, he wouldn't use legitimacy in this kind of situation anymore. But this event was different. He and his aunt thought that Lord Stark was planning to betroth Sansa to him, but they might be also wrong. And this event might be a trap for his Bolton house. They shouldn't have worried, as he wouldn't take any action against them as long as they don't act with any hostility toward his people. And they likely won't act directly against him as long as Lord Stark has control over the situation. But he didn't want to take risks. After all, his aunt was also here. After looking at Lord Stark's mind, he easily understood his game plan to control House Bolton's growing power. And that game plan was to marry him to his oldest daughter, Sansa Stark, just as his aunt has guessed. But he could also see the hesitation in Lord Stark's mind when he thought about this topic, as he didn't want to promise his daughter's hand to anyone just yet. And that was a good thing for Domeric, as he was planning to change betrothal conditions. Chapter 63, Long-Awaited Gifts. Winterfell Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. In the evening, the feast started, and Domeric despaired at having to drink piss-like ale to wet his throat. People in this world didn't know about germs. This meant they didn't know that boiled water is just as safe as drinking ale, if not safer. Well, the rest of the food was slightly better, even if it paled in comparison to the food that he ate on an everyday basis at Dreadfort. After all, he has set aside a good amount of wealth to import the wine and cheese from Arbor, different quality fruits from the different houses of Reach, and vegetables from Bravos, as well as a renowned chef from Pantos. And with the recipe book he got as a reward, it is understandable that the food he ate on an everyday basis would be much better than the feast prepared here. Not that he was looking down on Starks. He did not doubt that Lady Catelyn Stark had done the best she could with the resources she had in her hand, and she had his respect for that. During the feast, the Karstarks, the Umbers, and Manderleys sat at one table to show their support for Lord Stark, while Domeric sat at another table along with the head of House Ryswell, House Dustin, and House Whitehill, who showed their support to him by sitting on his right and left side. The feast was a bit tense because of the clear divide between the houses, and even Lord Stark was a little worried about it, even though his stoic expression didn't show much of anything. But he had the perfect solution to ease the situation and as well as make a name for himself in Westeros. It was time to give his long-prepared gifts to the houses of North. So, stood up with his metal cup in his hand and hit the cup with his fork to draw attention to himself. When he saw everybody in the hall looking at him in silence, he turned his head to Lord Eddard Stark and began to speak. "My lord, I have some special gifts from Bolton lands for House Stark. May I have your permission to have my men bring them to the hall?" he asked. He could bring a few men to join the feast with him, but he couldn't bring too much. So, most of his men waiting outside of the hall with his gifts. "You have my permission, Lord Bolton," Lord Stark replied with his stoic face, although he relaxed a little after he heard that Lord Bolton brought some special gifts. Bringing special gifts meant that House Bolton wasn't totally against the House Stark and wanted to build a good relationship between the two houses. With Lord Stark's permission, Domeric's first batch of men entered the hall with a gift in their hands. And Domeric started to explain these gifts to Starks and as well as to other lords. "My first batch of gifts is cleaning supplies that included soaps, shampoos, toothpaste, and toothbrushes for especially ladies from House Stark. As for men from House Stark, I brought full body armors, training armors, and weapons made from frost steel by a Grandmaster blacksmith from my land." As Domeric finished his explanation, his men brought gifts to Lord Eddard and Lady Catelyn. All the lords in the hall were watching armors and weapons with envy. Domeric had already started selling frost steel products to lords of the north, but most of the lords in the north were poor, so they couldn't buy much. And these armors and weapons were superb. They had never seen this kind of fine craftsmanship before. There were embossed emblems of House Stark on the armors and weapons. How could a blacksmith do that? What kind of monster is he? These were the thoughts of most of the lords in the hall at the moment. On the other hand, Lady Catelyn opened the box that was presented to her. And when the box was opened, a good smell suddenly spread all over the hall. Lady Catelyn was surprised by the sudden intense fragrance. It was an even nicer fragrance than perfumes. When she looked into the book, she saw some colorful soaps, some colorful liquids in glass bottles, some wooden containers, and some smash brush-like things with wooden handles. She looked at Dom Eric and asked, "Thank you for gifts, Lord Bolton, but I am afraid I didn't hear the things you mentioned before except soaps. What are these?" "The things are cleaning supplies invented by me, my lady. As soaps are used for skin cleaning, shampoos are used for hair cleaning, and toothbrushes and toothpaste are used for tooth cleaning. My men will instruct your castlemaster about their features and how to use them." Lady Caitlin nodded at him, and he continued his speech. "As for the second batch of gifts, I brought another creation of mine. When I was sitting in my castle, I thought there was little entertainment in this world. So, I decided to create some entertainment." As he was speaking, his men presented the board games to Lord Stark. "These board games of mine are not only entertaining but also improve your strategic thinking and calculative mindset. I am sure intelligent people will love them. I will not explain games and rules because it takes a lot of time. So, my men explain this game of mine to your castlemaster as well. But their names are checkers, backgammon, and Game of Thrones." Lord Stark and the lords in the hall didn't know anything about the games except they were entertaining and needed intelligence to play. But they could see that one of the boards was different from other boards. It has superb craftsmanship with some parts made from wood, some parts metal, and some parts glass. Anyone could see that some pieces had direwolf heads. So this was a present that was specially made for House Stark. And truthfully, this kind of gift could easily become a house's family heirloom. This was a one-of-a-kind, super luxurious gift. And as for my last batch of gifts, Lord Stark and other lords looked away from the game board and turned their heads toward Dom Eric. In their minds, there was only one question. Are there even more gifts? Chapter 64, Is She Dumb? Second bonus chapter of the week. Winterfell Castle. POV of Dom Eric Bolton. I brought some valuable artifacts for my last batch of gifts. These artifacts can measure the time perfectly. If people have one of these artifacts, they will no longer need candles and hourglasses to measure time. All they have to do is look at them and see how much time has passed. Dom Eric announced to people in the hall. Meantime, his men brought 5 big clocks into the hall and presented 2 different fine-crafted wooden boxes to Lord Eddard Stark and Lady Caitlin Stark. "These bigger ones are called clocks, and these types of clocks are called tower clocks," Dom Eric said. Actually, these clocks were grandfather clocks. But he wanted to increase his clock towers in his lands, so he changed their name and figures a little. Then Lord and Lady Stark opened the lids of the boxes and saw the round metal objects with superb craftsmanship that were made according to Stark House's banner. There were elegant chains attached to them. These small ones are called watches, and these types of watches are called pocket watches. They are easy to carry in pockets, and they have protective metal lids to prevent accidental damage. These clocks and watches are hard to make, so I brought 5 tower clocks and 2 pocket watches. And like before, my men will teach your castlemaster how to understand and use these clocks and watches, my lord. I hope you like these gifts of mine," Dom Eric said with a soft smile on his face. Lord Stark stood up, looked at Dom Eric and said, "I like them very much, Lord Bolton. These are very valuable gifts. House Stark thanks you for your generosity." While Lord Stark was giving his gratitude to Dom Eric, other lord and ladies in the hall were looking at Lord Stark with envy. All of these items were very valuable, but that is not the main point. These items were not common things. They were custom-made or rare items that someone couldn't just buy with money. That meant these items represented someone's reputation, noble standing, and power. They were sure that even wealthy houses from the south would envy Lord Stark at the moment. "Thank you, Lord Stark, for your kind words. I also prepared these kinds of gifts for all houses in the north. They were hard to transport, so I sent them to houses, castles, and keeps with my men. They will explain and teach them to your housemaesters. I hope lords and ladies from the north will like my gifts when they reach their home," Dom Eric said while looking at lords and ladies in the hall, and he saw that every lords and ladies began smiling after his words. The first step of Dom Eric's plan was success. The hour-long feast ended without any hostility thanks to Dom Eric's gifts. As the Stark children were taken to their beds, Dom Eric got bored of the whole thing and left the Great Hall as well, with the head of House Riswell, House Dustin, and House Whitehill following behind him to show the unity between their alliance, even though he didn't particularly care about this kind of things. But if they want to show their support to him, then he must show his support to them as well. That was why he was planning to give them a discount on the frost steel, as well as any food that they might want to buy from him. The day ended without much fanfare, even though he knew that tomorrow he'd have to talk with Lord Stark about the betrothal of his daughter. Winterfell Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. Domeric looked at the snow falling outside Winterfell and took out his wand before casting a warming charm on himself and his aunt who was standing beside him. "Thank you," she said warmly as they went back to looking at the snow in a peaceful silence. "I don't like summer snow," he said after a long while, and she turned to look at him with a raised eyebrow. "Why not?" she asked curiously. He wanted to say that it was because it disrupted the lives of the small folk who had to continue their hard work in the cold weather and risk losing their lives to the cold. But he knew that his aunt or any other lord or lady in this medieval era didn't care about the people as much as he did. So, there was really no point in explaining it to her. "I have my reasons," he said after a long moment, and she continued to look at him for answers for a while before she finally gave a shrug and went back to looking at the snow falling in the Winterfell courtyard. The snowfall would only last a few hours, and the snow would melt away by the end of the day, but that didn't make it any less annoying. He was just glad that the summer snow didn't fall while they were on their way to Winterfell. That would have been more annoying. After a bit of silence, he turned to his aunt and asked, "Did you meet with Lady Stark yesterday?" Her calm expression turned frosty at once at the reminder of Catelyn Stark, who was betrothed to the man that she once loved, Brandon Stark, who died in King's Landing many years ago. "I did," she said, clearly unwilling to say anything more on the subject. He decided not to push it and instead asked, "And what about their daughter, Sansa Stark? Did you talk with her?" For a small moment, "Yes," she said and pursed her lips, clearly unwilling to say anything more about the girl, but he kept looking at her, and she finally gave in and continued. "Sansa Stark is a naive little child who has her head filled with chivalrous knights and beautiful ladies and thinks that the South is a magical place from the songs," she said with pursed lips, and he almost groaned at that description. "Almost. So, she's dumb? She didn't look dumb to me last time we met," he asked with some amusement, wondering about the best way he could turn down this betrothal if Lord and Lady Stark were trying to betroth their dump daughter to him. After all, while he was interested in creating an alliance with the Starks so that there wouldn't be a civil war in the North, he was not going to marry a totally dumb and foolish girl who didn't deserve to be his wife for that. "No, I won't say that she's dumb, but she definitely needs a wake-up call before it's too late," his aunt said, "and removing the influence of Septa from her life would definitely be a good thing." "The Septa?" he asked. "Who else would fill her head with all those southern songs if not the Septa?" his aunt said with some steel in her voice. "Are you sure you don't like the Septa because of her teaching Lord Stark's children about the faith of the Seven?" he asked, and she pursed her lips once more but didn't reply. He himself didn't like the faith of the Seven as it reminded him of all the negative points of the medieval church in Europe. The church that burnt innocent girls by naming them witches. He did not doubt that if his magical powers came to light, then the faith of the Seven would definitely not look upon him favorably. He rather liked the old god's philosophy of live and let live in that regard. As for Sansa, as long as she wasn't totally dumb, that was no problem. He knew she was a child, and children would learn what you teach them. If she became his betrothal, all he had to do was teach her well. "Do you want to build a snowman?" he finally asked after a long silence, and she turned and shook his head almost immediately. After all, it would be rather unseemly for a lady to play games like children, and Lady Barbary was definitely a proper lady. He gave a shrug, covered himself with another warming charm, and went down the stairs with the plan to create a large snowman. After all, there were very few other ways to pass the time in this medieval world. Chapter 65 Snowman. Winterfell Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. Domeric was halfway done with the snowman when he heard footsteps from behind him. He saw two boys coming toward him and looking at him and the snowball curiously. "Domeric," the red-haired boy said with a nod of his head, and the black-haired boy behind him followed his lead and bowed to him as well. "Rob John," he said with a nod, and then went back to putting snow on the ball. "How may I help you?" "What are you doing?" Rob asked curiously as he moved forward to glance at the white ball that he was now moving around the courtyard to make it larger. Probably, Lady Stark had just reminded him to have a proper friendship with him, as House Bolton was one of the strongest houses in the North after their own. He could confirm that with simple legitimacy, but he wouldn't do that because he saw Rob as a friend. In the past, he could use legitimacy, loyalty charms, compulsion charms, and mind spells on nearly everyone for even small things. But after he overcame his traumas, he changed. He could still use those spells, arts, and charms, but only on his enemies and maybe in dire and risky circumstances. After all, if a spy was caught, he or she would be probably tortured in this kind of medieval era world. so he found it more humane to read minds in these kinds of situations. And Lady Stark did not know that Robb Stark already looked up to him as an older brother figure. And these were Robb's real thoughts, because all the loyalty charms he placed on the boy in the past already lost their effects. And he didn't cast new ones on Robb. He still felt bad for doing that in the past, as Robb Stark was a decent sort of boy who followed his father's footsteps in being honorable and kind-hearted. He didn't want there to be any enmity between the two houses for no reason, but he wanted to accomplish that by becoming Robb's real friend and building good relations with Stark with normal means. "I'm making a snowman," Domeric replied with a gentle smile as he continued to roll around the ball, and both Robb and Jon looked at him in confusion. "What's a snowman?" Jon asked with a frown, and when Domeric raised his head and looked at him, Jon's eyes widened in shock, and he instantly bowed to Domeric. "I meant no disrespect, my lord," Jon said quickly with his bowed head, and Robb frowned at Jon with a sad expression on his face. Looking at Robb's expression, he realized that Robb was frustrated because he considered Jon as his brother and felt bad when other lords and ladies looked down on Jon Snow because of his birth. Not that he cared about bastards, as he believed that the lords who fucks other women outside wedlock should be the ones to be blamed rather than their innocent children. "No disrespect taken. But what disrespect are you talking about, Jon? Aren't we friends? Why would I take it as a disrespect when a friend of mine asked me a simple question?" he said with a smile, and then turned to the castle and waved his hand to his aunt. It looks like normal waving, but she would understand his message. "Friend? My lord, that would be..." Before Jon finished his sentence, Domeric cut his speech and turned to Robb. He knew Jon would say something he wouldn't like, probably because of Lady Stark's teaching. Things like, Jon should know his place and shouldn't talk casually or be friendly to other lords' children. He saw a similarity between Jon and his childhood when he was living with Dursleys in his past life. "Robb, are you and Jon friends?" he asked Robb. And Robb answered without waiting, "Of course, Jon and I are friends. More precisely, we are more than friends, we are brothers." Domeric could see gratitude for Robb's words in Jon's eyes. He said, "See, Jon, Robb and I are friends. Robb and you are friends. That makes us friends. So, call me Domeric from now on," as Robb did. Now he could even feel the gratitude radiating from Jon and Robb. "Then I will do that, my lord," Jon said, and Domeric spelled his name with emphasis with a frowned face. "Do me Rick." "Yes, Domeric." Jon finally addressed him with his name. "Good. And you don't have to talk with me so formally either. We are now friends after all," he said, and then went ahead to explain the concept of a snowman to the two boys. By the end of the hour, they had created 2 snowmen, and he had made a decent friendship with the boys. Then one of the Stark guards came up to him and told him that Lord Stark was expecting him in his solar. He nodded at the guard, turned to the castle, and made a sign to one of his men who was waiting there with his aunt's order. His guard came to their side with 2 boxes in his hand. "Robb, Jon, these gifts are my personal gifts to you. Both boxes have pocket watches that were specially made for you. You can see your names on the backside. And there is a different watch in Robb's box as a name day gift. It is called a wristwatch. And Jon, you have to wait for your next name day to get your wristwatch," he told Robb and Jon. But he could see that they were already fascinated with the watches. Well, as long as they liked it. He bid Robb and Jon goodbye and went to meet with Lord Stark. Probably to talk with him about the betrothal between him and Sansa.